Each year, City of Lenexa staff prepares a recommended operating budget, which is presented to the Mayor and City Council for consideration. The city's budget serves a crucial role that guides our efforts for the coming year. Over the next few months, the City Council will thoroughly review the recommended budget for 2026.
This presentation offers an opportunity for you to explore what is under consideration and to gain insight into our proposed spending priorities for the next year. We actively encourage residents to participate in the budget process by providing feedback and asking questions. You can email your questions to budget@lenexa.com or call 913-477-7544.
This is our agenda for today's presentation. First, I'll provide a brief high-level overview of the proposed 2026 budget before handing it off to Chief Financial Officer Nate Bloom, who will review key elements of the proposed budget and provide revenue and expenditure projections, as well as fund forecasts. We'll end today's presentation with a timeline outlining the remaining steps in the city's 2026 budget process. If you'd like to read the full recommended 2026 budget document for yourself, you can find it on the city's webpage by searching City Budget from the search bar on the homepage. We encourage you to check it out and submit any questions you may have to budget@lenexa.com. Here's a look at how we ended last year and a preview of how things are going so far this year. Revenue collections in 2024 were better than expected, including strong revenue from building permits and investments, and these contributed to strong general fund revenues of 44% at the end of 2024. We also ended 2024 with all expenditures within budget. So far this year in 2025, we're seeing sales tax revenue that is flat from last year. However, we are seeing strong property tax revenues due to both new growth and a solid housing market. This slide compares the 2026 proposed budget to the 2025 approved budget from a high-level top-line perspective. As you can see, the fiscal year 2025 original budget was for a total of $246.7 million, including $168.3 million in expenditures and $78.4 million in reserves. For FY 2026, the recommended budget is for a total of $261 million, and this includes expenditures of $173.4 million and reserves of $87.6 million. This is an increase of $14.4 million compared to the 2025 budget, or 5.8%. A significant portion of this increase, over 1/3, is attributed to the city's special revenue and economic development funds, which are not operational funds to the city. Nate will talk more about these a little later in the presentation. A few highlights about the proposed 2026 budget. Our assessed valuation grew by $130 million compared to 2025 assessed valuation of $1.82 billion. It is now a total of $1.95 billion, which is an increase of approximately 7.2%. This is the 12th consecutive year of assessed valuation growth in both Lenexa and Johnson County of over 5% and reflects a strong local economy and a competitive housing market. In the 2026 recommended budget, we're recommending a 0.5 mil property tax rate rollback. This will be the 8th consecutive year that we have reduced the mill levy, and Nate will show you this history in his presentation. And note here, property tax accounts for approximately 44% of the city's total revenues. The proposed budget includes no other recommended changes to user fees, the stormwater service charge, nor franchise fees. In terms of additional employees, we are recommending the addition of 2.75 full-time equivalents, or FTEs. This includes a new position in Parks and Recreation, one in Municipal Services, a 0.5 FTE increase in the Lenexa Public Market, and a 1/4 FTE increase in Community Development. This is less than a 1% increase in staffing and brings the total authorized FTEs, including these new positions, to 569.15. You can see this breakdown of staffing by department on page 13 of the budget document. City taxes are only a portion of the total property taxes that our residents pay. This slide illustrates how a resident can calculate their city taxes, or the specific amount of taxes attributable to any specific taxing jurisdiction, by using the proposed tax rate. This illustration can also be found on page 14 of the budget document. And the bottom line is that Lenexa residents pay $25.36 per month for each $100,000 in home value, or the owner of an average Lenexa home pays $125.08 per month for all of the services that they receive from the City of Lenexa. You can see an illustration of the list of city services that our residents receive for that $125.08 per month. This includes the care, maintenance, sweeping, and snow plowing of over 830 lane miles of roads, over 175 miles of storm pipe, over 205 stormwater BMPs, and 34 developed parks totaling over 887 acres. It also includes over 45 miles of trail and the maintenance and operation of 3 outdoor pools, not to mention police and fire protection and the numerous other services that the city provides, including the facilities required to house all of these services. Again, as I mentioned, city tax accounts for only a portion of the residents' total property tax levy. This is an illustration which shows that in 2024, city tax ranged from 23.2% to 25.9% of a resident's total property tax mill levy, depending upon the school district in which they were located. And in each case, the school levy, which is depicted in red, accounts for the largest portion of the total property tax mill levy. A few years ago, the Lenexa City Council adopted these guiding principles, which set expectations for city services and helps to direct the allocation of resources in the budget to provide those services to the community. As such, city staff has kept these principles in mind as we have developed the recommended budget. And in addition, throughout the budget document, we have reported alignment with these principles through both key performance indicators as well as within the individual fund budgets themselves. As you look through the budget document, these icons are shown as an indication of which of these guiding principles the specific budget item supports. The guiding principles include superior quality services, prudent financial management, and strategic community investment, among several others. And with that, I'll hand it over to Nate.
Thank you, Becky, for that overview. Now we are going to discuss some of the key elements of the fiscal year 26 recommended budget, starting with our economic outlook. One of the first things that we do when putting together Lenexa's recommended budget is look at the current status of the environment the city operates in. Looking back over the last few years, the city and county as a whole experienced strong sales and use tax growth through 2023, with revenues stabilizing in 2024, a very hot labor market with dramatic increases in the cost to retain and attract good employees. Development remained strong as the city permitted development of $490 million in 2024, its second highest year ever. Nationally, there has been an increase in tariffs causing trade wars which have impacted the cost of goods, and the Fed has delayed expected rate cuts due to economic uncertainty. Looking ahead, the impact of tariffs remain largely unknown as there has been continuous changes in rates and strategy used in the national trade war. The city continues to experience workforce pressures, especially in the area of public safety. There are challenges related to the municipal insurance market as companies no longer offer insurance to local governments, or if they do, they reduce coverage while increasing premiums. Additionally, the historic revenue increases that the city has seen since 2020 are stabilizing and return to their pre-COVID norms. With rising costs for operations and revenues returning to more normal increases, the city is facing a unique economic environment in 2026. So how do we successfully navigate a challenging environment while maintaining our commitment to providing exceptional public services? By sticking to our budget principles. These budget principles are the foundation for our fiscal year 26 recommended budget, and they are that we fund ongoing operating expenditures with ongoing revenue sources. An example of this would be funding personnel costs, which are an ongoing expense, with sales tax revenue, which is an ongoing revenue source. We use one-time revenues for one-time expenditures. An example of this would be the ARPA funding the city received from the federal government, which we use to reconstruct the Lenexa Old Town Activity Center. We also maintain sufficient reserve balances to address unforeseen events. The city must maintain reserves so that we can navigate an economic downturn, such as a Great Recession, and still fund the necessary functions of the city. Additionally, we must maintain sufficient reserves so that we maintain our AAA bond rating, which saves taxpayers hundreds of thousands, if not millions, when the city issues debt to fund major capital projects. Additionally, we use a conservative approach to revenue estimating. Several of the city's revenue sources are very volatile and make up a significant portion of the budget, such as sales and use tax. As I mentioned before, the city experienced record increases in this revenue source post-COVID, and more recently, revenues have begun to level off in 2024 and the beginning of 2025. Finally, the city prepares and funds equipment replacement, building maintenance schedules to predict future expenses to make sure we do not fall behind on maintenance. Before we get into the numbers, I wanted to briefly touch on the mechanics of municipal budgeting. Per the balanced budget law, the city is required to adopt a budget that is in balance where total resources equal total obligations. Additionally, the city is required to budget our reserves as expenditures even though the city does not anticipate spending these funds during the budget year. The city's budget is made up of several different funds which are separate fiscal entities used to track specific revenues and expenditures associated with a particular purpose. An example of this would be the Rec Center Fund, which is funded from user fees, and the revenues can only be spent on rec center operations or capital projects. Currently, Lenexa has 38 budgeted funds, and each of these funds fall into one of these categories: the General Fund, Debt Service Fund, Special Revenue Funds, which are restricted or not revenue to the city in the case of a TIF or CID, and Enterprise Funds. A description of each fund category is shown on this slide. The General Fund is the principal fund of the city, which accounts for a majority of the city's operational expenditures. The Debt Service Fund is used to account for the payment of principal and interest on the city's general obligation bonds. Special Revenue Funds are used to account for revenues derived from specific taxes, grants, or other revenue designated for particular functions or activities. Enterprise funds are used to account for the operations financed and operated in a manner similar to private businesses. The intent is to provide goods or services to the general public on a continuing basis, primarily through user charges. All right, now we're going to dive into the numbers, including the fiscal year 26 recommended budget. The first column in the chart is the city's total recommended budget of $261.1 million. This includes the city's reserves, which are not planned to be spent in 2026. And the city's economic development funds, which are passed through and not revenue to the city. Since we do not intend to spend the city's reserve funds in 2026, the second column takes out our $87.7 million in reserves for a total of $173.4 million in expenditures. Since the city's economic development funds are passed through to reimburse developers for eligible TIF and CID expenditures within the district, and are not revenue to the city, we take these funds out to show the actual operational expenditures for the city of $150.3 million in 2026. Per Kansas law, the city is required to budget reserves and economic development funds even though they are not operational expenditures for the city. This pie chart breaks out the city's total budget, including reserves and economic development funds, by category. As you can see, the city's special revenue funds make up 22% of the city's overall budget. And as I mentioned before, these funds are either restricted in use or not revenue to the city. This chart is a breakdown of the city's general fund and compares the fiscal year 26 recommended budget with the fiscal year 2025's adopted budget. Excluding reserves, the budgeted expenditures for the general fund are increasing 1.57%. In total, the fund is increasing 2.73%. We will go over the details of these increases during the remainder of this presentation. Some of the key elements of the fiscal year 26 recommended budget include a $500,000 reduction to the city's tax rate. As Becky mentioned, this is the 8th consecutive year the city has reduced its tax rate, and we have forecasted in 27 through 2030 for the tax rate to remain flat. This budget maintains sufficient general fund reserves for our AAA bond rating and an uncertain economy. This budget continues to focus on providing high quality city services, and to be able to do that, we have to retain good employees and fund our strategic priorities. This budget also plans for economic pressures, including workforce pressures, inflation, tariff impacts, and always the potential for a recession or economic downturn. The total fiscal year 26 recommended expenditure budget is $173.4 million, which is an increase of $5.1 million or 3%. Compared to the fiscal year 25 original budget of $168.3 million. Net of economic development funds, the expenditure budget is $150.3 million, which is an increase of $5 million or 3.4% compared to the fiscal year 25 original budget of $145.3 million. The total general fund operating expenditures in fiscal year 26 recommended budget are $116.2 million. This is an increase of $2 million or 1.8% compared to the fiscal year 25 general fund budget amount of $114.2 million. As Becky mentioned, the total budgeted full-time equivalent FTE positions are 569.14 for fiscal year 26. This is an increase of 2.75 FTE compared to the fiscal year 25 revised budget of 566.39 FTE. The estimated mill levy of 26.459 mils is a reduction of a half mil from 25, and stormwater service charge is $109 per equivalent dwelling unit, which remains unchanged from 2025. Now we will look at the city's major revenue sources. The first major revenue source of the city is property tax revenue. In order to calculate the city's estimated property tax revenue for 2026, we take the city's assessed valuation received from Johnson County times the city tax rate. For the fiscal year 26 budget, Lenexa's assessed valuation increased 7.2% to $1.95 billion versus $1.82 billion in 2025. Approximately 30% of this increase is in the city's assessed valuation for 2026 is due to the new growth or new development within the city. This chart details the city's mill levy from 2017 to our estimated levy of 26.459 mils in 2026. This is the city's 8th consecutive mill levy decrease since 2018. This chart shows the dollar value impact of the city's 8 mill levy reductions since 2018. The value of 1 mill for the 2026 budget is $1.89 million, and the total mill levy reductions by the city is 5.373 mils. That equates to approximately $10.2 million in annual revenue deferred or forgone by the city. I will also note that the dollar value of these mill levy reductions increases each year that the city's assessed valuation increases due to the value of each mill going up. The Kansas State Legislature requires the city to calculate its revenue neutral rate, and if the city plans to exceed the revenue neutral rate, it must hold a public hearing. The definition of the revenue neutral rate is the mill levy required to raise the same amount of property tax revenue as the prior year, using current year assessed valuation amounts. Based on the city's assessed valuation of $1.95 billion, the city's revenue neutral rate is 25.142 mils. This would be a reduction of 1.817 mils from the current fiscal year 25 tax rate, and a further reduction of 1.317 mils from the fiscal year 2026 recommended tax rate of 26.459 mils. The dollar value of the reduction from our current fiscal year 25 tax rate is $3.43 million, and a $2.49 million reduction from the recommended 2026 tax rate, again of 26.459 mils. So what are the impacts of the increase in the city's assessed valuation and the half mil reduction to the city's tax rate? The city's estimated property tax revenues are projected to increase by 5.3% to $50 million versus $47.5 million in fiscal year 25. This assumes a delinquency rate of 3%. Property tax revenue is estimated at $41.4 million for the general fund and $8.6 million for the debt service fund in 2026. And again, a little under a third of the increase in assessed valuation and property tax revenue is due to new growth within the city. Another major revenue source for the city is sales tax. The city currently has a 1.375 city sales tax and receives a portion of the countywide sales tax revenue. Both are estimated to generate $36.4 million in fiscal year 2026. These projections are down 1.4% from the fiscal year 25 original budget, but up 0.3% from the fiscal year 2025 reestimate. The fiscal year 2025 reestimate is flat compared to actual collections in 2024. I want to note that the sales tax collections are not expected to decrease from 2024 actuals. However, we have reduced our projected revenue increases for 25 and 26. The estimated fiscal year 2026 use tax revenue in the city's general fund is $16.2 million. That is both the city's use tax as well as our share of the county use tax, which is up 1.3% from the fiscal year 2025 original budget of $16 million and up 1.9% from the fiscal year 2025 reestimate of $15.9 million. The stormwater capital charge is included on a property owner's annual tax bill, and the funds are used to expand the city's stormwater system. The estimated fiscal year 2026 revenue from the stormwater service charge is $6.75 million, which is up 1.8% from the fiscal year 2025 original budget of $6.63 million. Total revenue in the fiscal year 2026 budget is $171.97 million. Over 44% of the city's revenue comes from property taxes, and just over 42% comes from non-property taxes, which includes sales and use tax. Now let's take a look at our expenditure projections for the fiscal year 26 budget. Personnel costs are one of the city's largest expenses. Staff has received direction from council to not fall behind on compensation and benefits. The recommended budget includes 6% funding for employee compensation increases and appropriate market adjustments, with 3% reserved in non-departmental fund. I will note that staff will conduct a compensation study in 2026 and will bring a resolution with the recommended compensation adjustments based on the study to council for consideration in 2026. The city contribution for employee health insurance increases by 12.2%, or just over $1 million, from $8.49 million in fiscal year 25 to $9.53 million in 2026. Again, the total budgeted full-time equivalent positions are 569.14 for fiscal year 26. Fiscal year 2026 contractual services and commodity expenditures are $19.2 million in the general fund compared to $18.5 million in the fiscal year 25 budget. The increase of $700,000 is approximately 3.8% over the fiscal year 2025 budget. Capital outlay expenditures for fiscal year 26 are $878,000 compared to $884,000 in fiscal year 25 at a slight decrease of 0.68%. Although significantly improved from a few years ago, the city continues to experience lingering issues related to the delivery of critical equipment, something that started during the COVID-19 pandemic. An often used example of this would be the wait for new fire apparatus, still several years out after the city replaces the order. Additionally, the city has experienced vendors including tariff-related pricing increases in the cost of goods, especially in the areas of IT and construction materials. The fiscal year 2026 economic development payments, CID, NRD, special benefit districts, and TIF are $23.1 million as compared to $23 million in 2025. This increase of $100,000 or 0.43% is primarily due to new development in several districts. Majority of the revenue received in these funds are passed through and are not revenue to the city. The general fund transfer to the capital improvement fund for the pavement management program is $1.5 million for 2026. That's equivalent to approximately 0.78 mils and is compared to the $1.4 million transfer in 2025. That is approximately a 7.1% increase. The general fund transfer to the equipment reserve fund decreased to $2.25 million in fiscal year 26 compared to $2.5 million in fiscal year 25. There is no general fund transfer to the rec center in 2026 due to continued positive results in the rec center fund. The city's total expenditures in the fiscal year 2026 budget are $173.4 million. You'll note that public safety is the largest share at $40.8 million or 24%. Each year, the city puts together a multi-year financial forecast for each of its funds. However, we focus mainly on the city's general fund, debt service fund, and stormwater funds, as these funds make up over 70% of our total budget. Some of the assumptions included in our 5-year financial model are assessed valuation increases of 4% in fiscal years 27 through 2030. This is a conservative estimate as the city has had 12 years in a row where the increase has been over 5%. However, state legislation has threatened to cap assessed valuation growth at 4% annually. City sales tax is projected to increase 2% annually from 2027 through 2030. And then we have employee compensation increases at 4% again in fiscal year 27 through 2030. This chart shows that the general fund is structurally balanced through the life of the forecast with slight increases to fund balance in fiscal year 27 through 2030. General fund reserves are projected to be between 35 and 37% through the life of the forecast. Per policy, the reserve balance of the general fund should have a balance between 30 to 35% of revenues. However, in order to maintain our AAA bond rating and plan for possible economic downturns or unforeseen events, staff anticipates keeping the reserve balance just over the max percentage. Due to positive outcomes in 2024, the general fund reserve balance ended the year at $50 million or 44% of revenues. These are mainly due to revenues from building permits, which is our second highest year ever, and investment income, which is also our second highest year ever. Staff is recommending that $5 million of the general fund reserves be allocated to the capital improvement fund in order to bring the reserve balance closer to the max target of 35% of revenues. This will allow the city to cash finance several capital projects and save taxpayer money by not having to issue debt to pay for the projects. The debt service fund shows expenditures exceeding revenues in fiscal year 26 through 2030. Over the last few years, the city has built up reserves in the debt service fund to pay for major capital projects included in the financial model and some that are on the horizon. A few of the major capital projects included in the financial model are the first phase of 83rd Street, construction of Fire Station 6 at the old City Hall location, KDOT's Lone Elm Interchange Project, the city's share of the funding, and then improvements or building construction of roads at Canyon Creek Boulevard and 91st Street. The Stormwater Fund is structurally balanced through the life of the forecast. Staff anticipates the stormwater capital charge remaining at $109 per EDU in fiscal year 26 through 2030. The next steps in the city's budget process are laid out on this slide. The detailed fiscal year 2026 budget information for each city department will be presented on July 8th. We invite you to share your feedback on the fiscal year 2026 recommended budget by emailing us at budget@lenexa.com or by calling 913-477-7544.